XHTML, CSS, and accessibility standards. And we're going to go through the two sections, which will be HTML, XHTML, and then to accessibility. And then we're going to look at the CALI page and the validators, and you can get some idea how what you would do. The purpose of this is just to introduce you to accessibility questions. There is a government law, section 508, that applies to the federal government websites and requires them to be accessible to everybody who comes to them. So the blind, people who have visual impairment that's less than being blind, somebody has hearing impairments, people that have motor problems, they can't use a mouse, so they have to be able to use a keyboard to navigate. All of those things are covered by 508. And we'll go into where that came from, some of the things that you can do to meet the requirements of that. Why care about code standards and accessibility? Well, as the web develops, if your page does not meet standards, it may not be part of what's called the semantic web, and it may not be part of any kind of new web services that are provided. Your page could be just left behind. Also, as browsers more fully implement standards, web pages that are not coded to standards do not display as you intended. They're going to be different in each browser as they are now, but as the browsers become more standard compliant, pages that don't meet the standards will have even a further degradation in display quality. Hundreds of millions of people throughout the world have physical disabilities that cause them difficulty when using the web. So we want to be aware of those disabilities and ways that we can structure our pages, construct the pages so that they will work. People differ in their learning and web usage styles. Attention to accessibility broadens the reach of your pages. This is important both for law schools or for any kind of commercial operation. The more people you can get to your site who can actually use your site, the greater the opportunity you have to have those people become customers or become students or whatever. Various levels of accessibility are being required by law. Okay, both the U.S. federal government and many state governments have rules, regulations, laws now that govern accessibility. And there are a number of these throughout the world. We'll go to a page that has a whole list of them. I'll give you the site here in this presentation. Oops. What happened here? Oh. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. Sorry about that. The World Wide Web Consortium has developed a number of web standards, and these have standards both for coding of pages and standards for accessibility. The consortium was started in 1994. It's at MIT. It's associated with CERN, DARPA, INRIA, KIO, and ERCM. CERN, the Nuclear Research Center in France that Dr. Berners-Lee came from, where he invented the web. DARPA is the research agency of the Defense Department. INRIA is another French consortium that does all kinds of computing services. KIO is a university in Japan, and ERCM is another European center on intelligent mechanics, I believe. I've forgotten at the moment. Develops standards defining the web protocols and languages, develops tools and applications to implement the standards. Right now, the web standard for HTML is 4.01. It comes in 3 flavors: transitional, strict, and frame set. If your page uses some constructions that were in older HTML versions, you may want to use a transitional doc type, and that's how you would call this when you were writing a page, a transitional doc type. If you are going to be very strict in the way you do it, everything is going to immediately meet the standards. You're not going to have any old code in there. You use the strict doc type. And finally, if you're using frames, use the frame set doc type. For accessibility purposes, frames are discouraged, okay? HTML 1.0 and HTML 1.1 are both supported at this time by the validator at validator.w3.org. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. There's a level 1 and a level 2. Those are both standards at this time. You can write to either one. You can sometimes mix your materials from level 1 with level 2. You can validate those again at the CSS validator at w3.org. What is standards compliance? Well, for coding, follows the W3 requirements for the version, follows the requirements for the version of HTML and CSS, if you use CSS on the page, passes the test at the validators, okay? So it needs to pass a test. We're going to take a page and show it in the test validator. The validator URLs are here, validator.w3.org and jigsaw.w3.org / and then CSS-validator. A well-formed page, it's a concept that comes out of XML, but it also applies to HTML. And one of the things that people do is they'll write HTML and they leave out certain structural connectors that need to be there for the page to be well-formed. In the past, you could write an HTML page that doesn't have HTML on it, in the sense of there's no bracket, forward bracket, closing bracket with HTML. You could put in your tags around words, put HTML on the end of that file, save it, and view it in a browser, and it would display as HTML. Okay, that's not really the way you should write HTML. So there are certain things that need to be there in a well-formed HTML document, or when I say HTML, I also include XHTML. So a document type definition must be called from a document type declaration. Okay, then somewhere within the page there needs to be a character encoding. You need to say what code set you're using. Common ones are ISO 8859-1 or Windows-1252 or UTF-8, UTF-16. Those need to be on your page. Without those two, the page cannot be validated. That means it can't be run through one of the validators. A proper HTML code structure, and that proper structure is the document type declaration, HTML at the beginning, a header section, which has title within it, which may have a meta section and a style section, a closing head tag, an opening body tag, a closing body tag, and a closing HTML tag. That's a well-formed page. There can be nothing after this. The doc type can have one thing in front of it. That's an XML prologue. There's some problems with doing that, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit. Testing for valid code. Well, the easiest way is to write valid code. When you're writing valid code, use something that creates valid code. Well, you yourself can do that if you know the rules and the regs, or you can use something like HTML Kit, which contains a program called Tidy, written by one of the principal people at the W3, and that will go through and take your code and make it conform to the DTD of the version that you're using. So if you want an HTML 4.01 strict, it will make that code conform to it. It can be run against an older page and upgrade the page so that it meets the standard. Most commercial web coding applications do not produce valid code, okay? If you've ever translated something from Microsoft Word into Word's version of HTML, it's generally got a lot of junk in there that you can go in and throw away. Sometimes it's not even valid the way that it was done. The version of XML being used by Microsoft for the new Word 2003 version is not exactly the right XML version. So there are problems with it and other XML implementations. Some of the things they do are not the way that they're supposed to be done according to the standards. So it doesn't produce necessarily valid XML code. Several of the commercial publications or several of the commercial content services do have plugins that make their material much more code compliant. Dreamweaver MX, there are plugins available that make valid CSS, valid XML, valid HTML, whatever. Out of that, a number of the others also have the same kinds of plugins. Front page, there is a tutorial that I'm giving you a site to that deals with front page and tells you how to make it compliant. Please? Okay. How to test? Well, open your web browser and go to validator.w3.org. And when you get there, you will have the opportunity to either put in a URL or to upload a page to that validator, and the validator will test your page. It will test the code against the DTD of the doc type that you said that you wanted to use. And if either a doc type or a character encoding is not available, it can't test the page. And it will usually tell you which one is missing and give you an opportunity to find one that you want to use and put into it. So the test will be either a pass or a fail. Okay? If you fail, it's going to say, let's go back one step. If you were able to validate the page because the document type declaration and the encoding was there, then you can either pass and it says it's valid XHTML or valid HTML, in which case that's all it really tells you. It doesn't show you your code, and it doesn't show you how the page displays. If you try that and it doesn't pass because one or the other of those is missing, it tells you which one's missing, gives you the opportunity to correct it. If you get past that and it validates the page, but you fail the validation, then it's going to give you a line by line every mistake on the page. You'll be able to click on the line number, go to that line, and see what it was complaining about. If you go back to the top of the page, you'll be able to click on the exact version or exact part of the code standard that you did not pass, and it will again tell you what was wrong with that page. And it will then list the whole source of the page. You save the result of whatever has happened to you. Let's say you got through the validator. It told you that you had 100 errors, okay? You can now go to Tidy Online from that same page, validator.w3.org. On the right side there is a list. You select Tidy Online, and you can send it all of your code, and Tidy will try to fix the code for you. There's one problem with using Tidy Online. It tries to fix the code as XHTML 1.1 strict. Okay, so that does not allow for any kind of legacy code in that page. If you want to be able to use different codings, if you want to do a page that's HTML 4.01, transitional, strict, frame set, whatever, you need to install Tidy on your own computer. If you do that, then you can say what coding you want to use for your characters. You can say what coding you want to use for your document type declaration. And that will give you, more leeway to get the page validated. And you just go back and forth between Tidy and the validator until you end up with something that passes. CSS, when we said before what was a well-formed page, remember I said there's a style section if you use it? With CSS, cascading style sheets, this is part of the separation of content from display. Cascading style sheets covers display. And the idea is that you will use it to either put things in columns or, in boxes and areas, to add any images or whatever you want to. You can put style directly in your page in the head section with style, an open tag and a closed tag, and put the style in between it. You can put style on an individual tag. So if you have a paragraph tag, you could put style equals and put something in there. That's inline style. You can have your style sheet in a separate page, which is called whatever it is, stylesheet.css. That's the best practice, is to use a separate style page. That enforces more of the separation of content and style. You can go back to the CSS validator, and there you can have your CSS validated, whether it's inline or in a separate sheet. Okay, if it's in a separate sheet, you upload that page. If it's inline, you upload the regular page. It goes through and it'll tell you if the CSS content markup in there is correct. Again, it's the same situation. You keep going back and forth with the tidy and everything until you get your CSS to pass. Once you've done that, and that's the first thing, now you can look at questions about accessibility. Let's just review things, issues to consider when you're trying to get it to pass. You need to get a different document type declaration. Recognize that the document type declaration that you use is going to cause different display in different browsers. Why? Because the browsers don't currently support the standards completely. Okay? So you need to test your page in the main browsers that you know are coming into your website. With the CALI website, we looked at it back in March, and something like 85% of everybody coming in was on IE, some version of IE. We had like 1.5% on Max, and I think it was like 3.5% on Netscape. So from that, we could say, well, how many people does that represent? How many real page views were there? Do we need to make our code such that it will display basically the same on all of those browsers, or can we just concentrate on one, like IE? So those are things you have to look at. You're going to have to look at your server log and make that decision. When you do that, the way you put in the document type declaration is also going to cause problems. The browsers themselves have a standards compliant display mode. They have an almost standards compliant display mode because everybody tries to look like IE, right? And then they have what's called a quirks mode. And quirks mode is the way that most people think the browser is supposed to display things. All right? The way people think it's supposed to be displayed, not the way the standards say it's supposed to be displayed. Usually in the document type declaration, there's 2 lines. Document type declaration, whatever it is, the second line is the namespace that's being used. If you leave out the namespace, you get one kind of display. If you put the namespace in, you get a different kind of display. You have to test it in all the browsers and decide which one is the one you want. It can pass validation without the second line. So some people will use that. They will want everybody, all the browsers, to go to quirks mode when the display of the material. Tables. Tables are used for layout a lot, and it's not against web standards. Many people who do CSS will say, you can't use tables for layout. But yes, you can. And it's been in the standard since like HTML 3.2. What you can't do with tables if you use them for layout is add things like headers, summaries, and other things that belong to data tables. because now you'll confuse any kind of assistive technology that tries to read that page. So if a blind person comes in with the JAWS reader or one of IBM's readers or something, and you've used data table markup on a layout table, you're going to completely confuse that person. They're not going to be able to figure out what's going on with your page. Be sure your page content linearizes. What's that mean? If somebody comes in and they've got CSS turned off, so they're not going to see your great style and the way you rearrange things on the page and display, and if they have color turned off, they've got JavaScript turned off, so that what they're really getting is just a text page, you want each section of your page to read in a linear fashion so that it makes sense. Okay? You can test this pretty easily by using links, L-Y-N-X, the links browser, to go and look at your page. If you can go to your page and it's still usable in links, then it linearizes correctly. Some resources that you can use to learn about this. There's tons of things, really. I mean, this is just a start to get you going, and we'll add more things. The specifications page, just go to www.3.org and start looking in there. You'll find all the specifications for the standards. Usenet news groups, there's a number of them, alt.html, alt.html critique, tags, comp info system, www.authoring.html. There are lots of those that you can go to and get material. A number of people who are involved in the standards process actually post to these news groups. Some books that I recommend: Elizabeth Castro, HTML for the World Wide Web. It's the 5th edition of that one. I like it. It's fairly easy to understand. I think that most people will be able to get an overview of the concepts from that. You want more information about it? Eric Myers on CSS and his other titles he's got. I think he has like 5 books all on CSS. They all deal with a different aspect of it. But he's extremely thorough and very good. And there's many other titles that you can get to. Let's talk about disabilities, the other part of our question. In the United States, individuals with blindness and low vision, there's 15 million people. Okay, they use screen readers and keyboard navigation to get around. So all those wonderful drop-down menus you've got that somebody needs to put a mouse on, that's not going to work, right? Motor disabilities, you've got spinal cord injuries, cerebral palsy, multiple sclerosis, various things like that account for another 1.2 to 1.5 million people. These two together, every year another 25,000 people enter into one of these categories, right? They use assistive technology, can't use a mouse for navigation. Again, you need to think about people that have to use the keyboard to get around. Deafness and loss of hearing, 22 million people. Okay, they can't hear audio-only materials, or they can't hear soundtracks to film that you put on. So you've got to provide something for them. If you have an audio-only section, you should have a full text transcription of that. If you have some kind of a film, there should be captioning provided. So closed captioning. Source for these materials or for this information is the WebAIM Disability Fact Sheet. And that organization is at Temple University, and they've developed actually one of the validator tools that you can use called WAVE, W-A-V-E. The W3, we said before that they developed all of the standards and everything. Well, they've developed standards in accessibility area. And in 1997, they started the Web Accessibility Initiative. They developed tools for constructing and testing accessible web pages. They developed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, checklists, and techniques. If you go to this page, this URL, you're going to find a lot of material there. This is a printout of part of that. So these are guidelines, the techniques, all of that from the W3. Other WAI activities, authoring tool accessibility guidelines, checklists, and techniques, again, for all of these areas. User agent, XML just came out last month. Accessibility features of SMIL, which is the standard multimedia, I think, synchronized multimedia. SVG, CSS, HTML4, evaluation and repair tools. Again, it's at the same URL, just scroll down the page. But they have all of these different materials available that you can read through and find out how things are supposed to work, right? Others, United Nations. In the 1980s, they came up with Rule 5 of the Standard Rules on Equalization of Opportunities for People with Disabilities, and they've said that it does apply to electronic resources. European Union, Council resolution in 2002. The UK has the Disability Discrimination Act of 95, Parts 3 and 4. Part 3 applied to commercial websites. Part 4 applies to educational websites. As of 1 September last year, all UK higher education websites must include accessibility features. Okay, there's a gentleman over in England, Brian Kelly, who did a survey in the middle of September of 160 universities' websites in England, and only 3 of them met. There are 3 levels of the standard, A, AA, and AAA. None met AAA standard, 3 met the AA standard, 47 met the single A standard, and all the rest failed. And those are requirements, legal requirements in the UK under the Special Educational Needs and Disability Act of 2001. Note, they passed the act in 2001 and made it immediately available or immediately applicable to the schools. Basically said, you've got 9 months to get into compliance. Australia has some, New Zealand, Canada. In the United States, we've got a number of different laws which all affect this area. Now, most of these are in regard to government websites. So you think, well, then what's it have to do with me in an educational institution? Well, Arkansas's law says that if you are in an institution that is partially or fully supported by public funds, your website must meet accessibility standards. And they use the WAI standard, the single A standard. They did not use the 508, which is the one we'll talk about mainly here, which is a federal government standard. So you have the Rehabilitation Act of '86, Section 504 and Section 508 standards for electronic and information technology. It was an act that was enacted in '98. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, Telecommunications Act of 1996, Section 255, and there's another Education Act of 1998, which we're waiting for the Department of Education to issue its final rules on that. But that one specifically is going to address whether all higher education institutions or all those who receive government funding in the United States must meet accessibility standards. 508 is the one that most people are looking at now in the United States. It's the one that governs all federal websites, anybody who is a contractor to the federal government, and probably will be the one that will govern certain university sites if your school gets a lot of, its funding from the federal government. Now, remember, in the past, this is the way that some of the other things, Title IX, I believe, came under that and was made applicable to education institutes with this. Sort of the same kind of reasoning, okay? Okay, prior to the development of graphic-intensive computer applications, accessibility was really not that difficult on the internet because we were all using terminal programs and we had basically a text screen in front of us. The screen readers that had been developed, and these have been around for a long time, were able to handle that. Or people could get a transmission to a fax machine or to a teletypewriter, Braille output device, Braille input device. Things were okay in a sense. You could get to most material. When graphics intensive applications started being developed and things like PDF came along, word processing formats, they became less accessible. When the HTML version was put together by Tim Berners-Lee, the idea was that it was going to just display text pretty much. There might be some tables from a scientific article. Remember, it was started to enhance interchange of articles between physicists. Okay, so it really wasn't a concept in his mind at the beginning that it was going to be what it is now. As Netscape and Microsoft started fighting over trying to control the browser area, they each came up with different codes, proprietary codes that could be used to display materials. So that caused a lot of problems, and that's really when Tim Berners-Lee started thinking about, well, how much of the standard can I have? What are the standards that we have to have in order to make the web work? And that's how we sort of got to that point. The City of San Jose court case was actually a complaint filed against the City of San Jose in 1995 by one of the council members. And he was a blind member of the council who said that I can't get the minutes of the meetings off of the web space because you're now putting them in PDF format. So you're in violation of the ADA for doing that. They were able to come up with a way to give access to that individual, and it turns out that they had, I believe, 2 council members who were blind, and the woman who was a corporate counsel was actually hard of hearing, so she also had problems with the council meetings, and they had been doing some work with that. She's the one who then drafted a series of rules for the city websites. And that series of rules became something that was adopted by lots of cities throughout the United States for their websites to allow for accessible use of the websites. It also, from that complaint, the Department of Justice set rules on ADA accessibility as they apply to web pages, and that was in 1996. 1998, with the Section 508 being enacted, that governed, again, all of the governmental websites and those of contractors. And it's based on what's called the Web Accessibility Content Guidelines 1.0, Priority Level 1, okay? And then there were some things added by the United States and some things that we didn't say we were going to enforce. So you need to look at www.section508.gov, and that will give you a list of all the rules. They're also posted in the CFR, and I think that's Title 36, 1194. Okay, for U.S. states, this site will give you a list of all the state requirements. So this is from the Information Technology Technical Assistance and Training Center, and it's very good. It'll tell you if it's a law, if it's a rule or regulation, give you an idea who it applies to, all of that. So you can go down through it. The state of Connecticut also has an accessibility board, and their website also lists states that have applied Section 508. And there it's listed that 12 states have enacted Section 508 type regulations for websites. But the first one listed is really gives you even more information than the Connecticut site does. The states have based their requirements on WAI, WCAG, on ADA, and on Section 508. Some of these apply to all entities financed in full or part with public funds. With the English side, just to remember, all educational sites in England were required under their SUNDA guidelines to make all their websites accessible. Some things to consider. Color should not be used that will confuse colorblind users, right? You don't want to have red on blue. That might be black on black. You know, there are all kinds of problems that you have. There are tools that you can use to test this. And there are about 6 different kinds of color blindness. So there are different colors and different things that happen. You can use these tools to check your page and see if it causes one of them to occur. There's something called tab index and access keys. This kind of coding should be in your web page to allow somebody to tab past things and go to another one. One of the problems with tab index or access keys, some of the applications you're using on the web or the browser may already have access keys bound to a certain letter, like Control P for previous or Control N for next or something like that. You'll need to provide a list of what your access keys are. You can get an idea of some that are being used quasi-standardly because there is no standard yet in regard to what keys to bind for what access activity. But if you go to that site before the section 508.gov, it uses access keys and it has a list of what they are and how they're used. And also the W3 page has access keys on it with a list as to which ones and how they're being used, with some sort of recommendations but not yet a standard. Skip navigation links should be provided. If somebody comes to your website with a screen reader and the first thing they get to is a graphic, right? Because the screen reader is reading the code of the website, all right? It's not, they're not seeing anything, so it's just reading the code. If your code starts off with a graphic, maybe 2 or 3 of them, or some JavaScript, something like that, the screen reader basically can't handle any of that. It's dead in the water. So it got the name of the title of your page, and it didn't get any further because you didn't have a skip navigation link at the top, which would say, to go to content, click here, or, you know, click 1 or something like that. Use access keys, tab index, whatever, to go through. Tab index, to explain, if you're not familiar with it, if you press the tab key, it should go to the next section. And you can assign which section is the first section to go to with a tab key, which is the second section, which is the third, by using the tab index, okay? Alt text. Alt text should be used for all informative images. That means that you have the alt equals and the quotes, and in between the quotes you have a description of what that is. Not something like building.jpg 53,000 bytes. That doesn't really tell anybody anything. It should say law school building, you know, something like that. Informative text in the alt text. Null alt text is alt equals and 2 quotes with no spaces between the quotes. That tells the screen reader that that image has no function, really. There's no need to tell the person who's using the screen reader what the image is about. Some people will do empty alt tags, and what that is, if you do alt equals quote space quote, then that's an empty alt tag. That causes problems because all the screen reader can say is image, right? Image. What kind of image? Where does it go? Going to that also, that causes problems. Image maps, frames, and applets basically should be avoided. If you use frames, you need to use the title element, and you also should use an alt element on the frame so that they know what the frame is, okay? You need to do it 2 ways because some of the screen readers will not recognize, that's title and name. You need to do it 2 ways because some screen readers will read the name first And if there's no title, then you're okay. But others, if you put in a title, don't put the name, they can't read the title because they were looking for the name. And if they don't have the name, they default to the alt. So it causes you problems. So just put both of them in there if you use frames. Field set, summary, and labels should be used with forms. Field set allows you to collect a number of entry boxes or whatever, check boxes, all of that together into a form. And it tells the individual who's going to the page what that form's about. Summary is a more detailed description of the form and what it's about and what it's going to do. Labels, you need to put label 4 on materials. You need to add this label tag, and it's a little, another quirk of the standard, and you really need to look at something. There's a book called Developing Usable Forms for the Web, which really goes into a lot of this material. Again, layout tables do not have labels. Labels are used only in forms and in data tables, okay? Data tables use headers and summaries to allow linearized reading, just as your text should be set up so that it makes sense. So should a complicated form. Forms are really, if you put a complicated data form on a web page, you've got a lot of coding to do to make that accessible. So you might want to just, consider whether you want to do that or just put a summary up there about what it's about with a link to the form if somebody wants to get to it. But, if you're trying to make the form as the main thing, you've got a problem. Use CSS to control the order of display. What's that about? If in your code, you can put a list of links, which might be your navigation links, at the front of the page, or you can put it at the end of the page or in the middle of the page or whatever. But if you were going to linearize that page, you probably want to put that list of links at the bottom and put your skip navigation at the top so that the individual who's coming in with a screen reader can get to things without having to sit there and have the screen reader go through link to home page, link to section, link to, it'll just keep going, and it'll read the subsections too. So put that at the bottom of the page. Use CSS coding to make it display as a div or something at the front of the page. And again, with your skip navigation at the top. You should provide text or RTF versions of PDF files. There should be some way that somebody comes into a PDF file that you have that in there. The newest version of Acrobat is much more friendly toward accessible PDF files and allows a lot more control in producing those kinds of files. So if you use Acrobat, the full Acrobat, to produce files, you should look into the accessibility features that are available there. Again, transcripts of audio materials, captioning of video materials. Allow the user to control the size of text. Okay, use relative sizes, provide a style switcher, use X small, X large, large, those kinds of code words. There are, again, you have to try it out in different browsers because some recognize X large, some don't. When you are using something like percentage, 30%, 40%, or you're looking at EMs, EM, and you use the percentages there. Remember, cascading style sheets mean that you're inheriting things, and sometimes it can turn out that the size of the text is much different from what you expected because somewhere above you have also specified a size, and it gets inherited by the things below. You've got to recognize that there's parent-child relationships in the cascading style sheets. Provide an explanation of the accessibility features of the website. If you go to www.section508.gov, the first thing you get at the top is skip here, skip here, skip here, and then accessibility features of this site. You can click on that and see those accessibility features. Okay, again, accessibility compliance depends on the country and the standard adopted. But basically, it's going to be WAI's level 1, 2, or 3, A, AA, or AAA, and U.S. Section 508, which is, again, a combination of the A section, level 1, and some specific materials for the U.S. Checking accessibility. Bobby is an application that's been around a long time. Was bought last year, I think it was, by Watchfire, and you can still use it for free, but you can only test one page per minute. Okay? So you can't use it to test your whole page in an automated fashion the way you could when it was free. So you just do one page per minute. Cynthia Says is another free one. Each of these will give different outcomes, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Wave 3 is a new one that's been developed down at Temple, as I said, at the Web AIM, and we'll look at Wave 3 in a moment. Testing accessibility. Use those things that we just talked about, standard accessibility applications for your platform to test for compliance. So you could use those testers. Use whatever version of a screen reader is used on the OS that you're using. You know, most of us, I think, have JAWS. Is that right? Okay, there might be IBM Homepage Reader. There's Windows Eyes, I think it's called, Windows Eyes. There's a number of these. Mac has a program that reads pages to you. You need to use those on your web pages. See if they work. In Windows 2000 and XP, there's actually a reader in there, but it generally cannot read web pages. It'll give you the title. It might get to the first paragraph if there's no intervening graphics or menus and stuff, and then it usually dies. So it's not real useful. You have to get one of these other programs. The problem with JAWS is that it's expensive. It's like $900 a seat. So most places have 1 or 2 or 3 of them installed, and everybody has to share that terminal. That needs to use it. Use links to view the page and determine if it's usable. There's an online links page that you can go to and do this, or you can just download a version of links. There's a version that runs on just about every operating system there is. Download that version and use it to look at your page. Make sure that the page is usable in links. Turn off colors and view the screen in black and white. Turn off sound and figure out if you can still navigate and understand the page. If you use some kind of a sound when somebody runs a mouse over something to indicate that this is a link, think about that. You know, somebody's not going to know that. So you need to have something there, some way that they can get around the page. Emacs Speak. I don't know if anyone has Emacs Speak and any of the Linux users use it. Emacs Speak will also navigate pages for you. Have disabled users test the page. This is your real thing. Have them test it. If they can use it, then you've passed the test. Resources for XHTML coding. Again, W3.org. For CSS, CSS Discuss.org, Mailman, eVolt page is a good page. Accessibility resources, w3.org/capital letters WAI /, okay? Section 508, the road to accessibility, is actually the name of the page at section508.gov. And that's a resource for all government departments to go to, and they start from there. Each individual department has an accessibility officer now. And so almost all of the departments of the U.S. government you go to, you're going to find a link to accessibility information. What are the standard coding practices for that department? All of them have come up with style sheets, all kinds of things that they have of it. The ITTATC page is good. Here's the Connecticut Website Accessibility Committee that I talked about before. This is the one that tracks 508 states that have adopted 508. Joe Clark, Building Accessible Websites. Has anybody seen this one? Joe Clark is a Canadian. He is very opinionated guy. He's been doing accessibility issues for about 20 years, and his big thing before the web was closed captioning of television and things like that. And he's known as Mr. Closed Captioning. And it's because of his efforts that a lot of this is done anywhere in the U.S. and Canada. Well, he's written a book called Building Accessible Websites. It's a very good book. It comes with software. It's the only one of the books that does come with software to help you test and build sites. And he has a pretty good understanding of what's going on, but again, he's looking at it from a WAI perspective because of Canada. He does cover the 508, but he doesn't use it as the main thing in the book. Accessible websites from Glasshaus. Jim Thatcher is the guy at IBM who invented IBM's homepage reader. He's been into accessibility for like 40 years as a website consultant on it. He and about 8 other authors wrote that book. It's a very good book and goes into a lot of depth about things. Gives you a lot of background that you otherwise wouldn't get. One that just came out, and this is correct, small letters, Designing with Web Standards by Jeffrey Zeldman. Zeldman has a website called happycog.com, and you might want to look at that website. It is, in this book, he gives you all the information about how he designed the website, what issues were considered, all of the things that you need to do. Zeldman's very good. He's out of New York City. I like that book a lot. Online tutorial. This is the one that talks about front page. This is from Jennifer Foltz. She's at Kansas State, and it's a very good tutorial. www.oznet.ksu.edu/agronomy, right? AGRONOMY / capital letters TECHSPT / then lowercase tutorials. And it's a very good set of tutorials. Actually, there are, I think, about 3 parts. Part 1 is the one that you might want to look at, and it's really nicely done. She integrates in the tutorial not only the web coding, but the accessibility at the same time you're doing the coding. So it really puts both of them together. Okay, let's see if we can get out of this. I've got Internet Explorer and Netscape open, and what we're going to do is look at the CALI webpage. Okay, here's the page in Netscape, and let's see what it looks like in Internet Explorer. Yes. Looks pretty much the same, right? All right, let's test the page. So we go up here, Control-C to save it. Now I'll go to Validator. It's a W3 validating service. We can enter the address here, or if we were working on a page on our own computer, we could come down here, browse to the right page, put it in this slot, and go with it. So we're going to shift insert, CALI.org, hit validate URI. Hello. Oh, how nice. No. Fatal error, no doc type specified. So it tells you right off the bat, right? So we can see that it says, though. Yeah. It gives you the encoding used for this page. As you can see, it's ISO 8859.1. It detected that automatically. We could have also, it could detect any of these, or we could add any of these and say what we wanted. So you can see it's not just English. So we have Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Latin, Celtic, Hebrew, Greek, whatever. So you can write your page in just about any language, and it will be able to figure out what the encoding is. Now, one of the things that you should include in a page is what language you've written it in. It's not always there, and it doesn't fail you when you don't include it, but it really should be in there, because that then lets a browser that's set up know to pull out that kind of that language and to display in that language with that code base. The doc type, again, here are the doc types that it can detect. So it can go down to HTML2. So, you could have something like that if you wanted. HTML 3.2.4.4.1. You'll note something's missing here. HTML 3.5. HTML 3.5 was, we might call it an experimental version of HTML, which really integrated a lot of things that people were looking forward to, but then they decided it went too far too fast and they withdrew it. So you can go with your frame set, transitional, strict for all of these. It will test them all. We go down, and it says doc type. You could have included this for a doc type. Notice the two lines at the top. One is the doc type declaration. The other tells it the namespace that it's going to go from. You need part of these. You don't need all of them. Again, like I said, each browser is going to react differently to how many of those lines are included. Okay? Over here on the right, you can see that we have a number of things that we can look at. Documentation, source code, what's new, access keys. As I said, that'll tell you what access keys are in effect on this page. These are your things that you can use. CSS validator. You could check for links. You can use HTML tidy on this page now. Tidy online. And then it gives you all of the specifications for XHTML 1.1, 1.0, and 4.01, XSL 1.0, CSS levels 2 and 1. This is the WAI homepage. From here, you can get to most of the materials that deal with guidelines, checklists, and techniques. So we could use all of those. I want to go back to the CALI page, and let's look at the code itself, the source code. So page source. Netscape is nice because it does all this indenting and colorizing for you, but that depends on being able to see colors. But it does show us some things. Let's look for whether this is a well-formed page, right? So we know it doesn't have a doc type, so we've got that against it already. We do have a character set, so that's okay. So let's scroll down the page. We notice that it's using tables, and then for display, that's fine. We go on down the page, more stuff, more tables. And we get to the bottom of the page. And what's this? Font size? It's in the wrong place, right? So this page is not going to validate, even when you put the doc type on it, and now it can go through the test, it's going to fail the test because this is not allowed here, right? You got to get rid of that or get it up into the page so that it is in a well-formed document again. We're out of time. We're out of time, but I just want to say one thing. We did a survey of all law school websites. 3 schools had websites that validate, okay, that pass the validation. So those schools are University of Kansas, University of Tulsa, and SMU, okay? One site had one thing wrong, it's very easy, and they can fix it, and then they will pass. Everybody else failed that aspect of this. Those 3 sites, because they were the only ones that validated, well, they're the only 3 sites that be checked for accessibility, because one of the things in the accessibility standard is that they are properly coded sites and valid HTML, and none of those passed accessibility standards. There were 2 sites with text pages. Seattle was one, and I forget the other one. So for most of the sites did have a document type and a character encoding. They were tested, and they didn't pass. There were 30 sites that could not be tested. That changed from January to June because somebody asked a question on technoids, and we said, oh yeah, we're doing a survey. And suddenly everybody went back and added doc types and character encodings, and I had to go back and go through all 187 pages again. But it resulted in something that's better than what we had to start with. Now what you need to do is to go back, test your pages using the validator, find out what's wrong, make those corrections so that it passes that part. And now the next thing is to think about adding accessibility. Thank you.
But when you say pages, validating pages, only the home page or?
Only the home page is what we looked at.
It's not a good survey.
They're
Good site might have very bad pages underneath.
right. Well, you know, if you have an automated way of testing 10,000 pages, then we could do it, right?